Katanas versus European swords. Which one would you bet on?
Okay, AI-generated video. Let's do the katana versus every European sword, I guess. I know they probably mean the longsword specifically, but if a human actually read that script, then we wouldn't be here. Katana versus every European sword. I think we can safely say that this would beat most Bronze Age weapons. Bronze was relatively weak, and katanas were made in like the 1400s or so, and used the same steel that everybody else used. At least sometimes they imported steel from the rest of Asia, other times they used their own iron ore, other times they used iron sand, but their steel was on par with everybody else. This was not inferior to the bulk of Europe. Multiple places have debunked that. Let's get that out of the way first. That's not a portion of this video. So the katana will beat bronze weapons. Moving on in history, the Roman Gladius. This is a kinjal, but close enough. Despite what other AI-generated videos say, Rome did not conquer the universe because of their sword. The sword was just one singular part of their kit. But it was a good piece of kit. The relatively short Gladius was perfect in the close quarters of a shield wall. It was put to brutal effect. It did well there. But this katana is shorter than average and obvious reach advantage. That's where most people stop thinking with the longsword versus katana debate. So in a theoretical duel situation, the katana would have an advantage. In close quarters, the katana is still relatively short and nimble with two hands, so it would have advantage there too, but in very close quarters, like in a shield wall, Gladius has the edge. ChatGPT can't even make jokes that bad. Next we have the Viking sword, and contrary to the name that we call most of these by, a lot of them were made by Frankish smiths. And they had a really good reputation, and many of them used foreign steel, used Asian crucible Damascus steel. So some Viking swords were really good. When people are saying European swords are superior, they're always like, spring steel this, spring steel that. But going by Sword and Crucible, which has an examination of over 100 different swords, and the work of Guns in History on YouTube, Twitter, only a small portion of European swords were actually made of what we would consider spring steel, and a lot of those were Viking swords. So for the first time in the katana versus European sword debate, these actually might be a superior material, because they were made from steel outside of Europe. Because they were made of steel, there's a cat out there, because they were made of steel outside of Europe, which Japan also historically had access to. Like I mentioned, this katana is on the shorter side, and the lengths are comparable. A full-length katana would be really close. So no distinct edge there. However, katanas are often two-handed weapons, which means you need to hold them in two hands. And if you have a one-handed weapon, you can blade your body like that and have more reach. So arguably, the Viking sword has better reach, but two-handed, better controllability. It's kind of up in the air. The tips on a lot of Viking swords aren't really optimized for thrusting as much as a thin longsword would be, and even in the sagas they're used to cut more often. And since the sword community really likes to simplify things, usually the curved blade is the better at cutting. Actually, I'm going to use this one to talk about the European messer and falchion, because you could probably find this on the Elmsley typology, and you could also probably make a katana on that same typology. It would have a different sheath or scabbard, probably leather, a different handle, but you can get pretty much the exact same blade profile and curvature on that typology, and some European blades did have guards that were on the side, so it wouldn't be absolutely ridiculous to imagine that some European was like, you know, I like those side guards, I want that to just go all the way around instead of a regular cross guard. And Europe regularly used differential hardening and pattern welding and folding and twisting of their steel to increase the quality. So you could have seen like an 80% accurate copy of this in Europe, theoretically. An arming sword would be one-handed and shorter, but more optimized for thrusting than the Viking sword, so it's got a lot going for it. But I think the control that you would get with being able to hold a katana in two hands and it being longer would give it an edge. Now the meat of the discussion, the longsword, what everybody talks about. Obviously it has reach advantage, but as I film here in my office, that isn't always a benefit, and that's the thing that I say a lot of times. In like a complete vacuum judging two people of equal skill, yeah, I can see the longsword winning. But it's important to consider that the katana wasn't the only sword that Japan used. They didn't use thermal katanas, but still. And reach can be a huge advantage in some contexts, but so can not having that much reach in other contexts. And at the end of the day, if there really was a best sword, then everybody would have used it throughout history in every single context. And even the peak of European blades got replaced when it fell out of context.